I've always loved hosting our weekly Dungeons and Dragons sessions. The basement of my house had become our haven, a place where the mundane realities of life could be replaced by grand adventures in fantastical realms. For years, our group of 6 friends had gathered around my old oak table, dice clattering and imagination soaring. Our dungeon master, Sarah, was known for her immersive and lore-rich campaigns. She had a knack for weaving intricate plots that kept us on the edge of our seats. This particular campaign, however, would change everything. It was a typical Friday evening when we began the fateful session. The basement was filled with the usual buzz of excitement as we settled into our seats. Sarah's eyes gleamed with anticipation as she handed out our character sheets and set the scene. "The kingdom of Eldoria is on the brink of collapse," she recapped, her voice low and dramatic. "A malevolent demon threatens to devour the land. The only hope lies in a forbidden ritual to bind the creature." We were hooked. As the night progressed, in-game we discovered an old text in an ancient crypt which held the supposed ritual. Sarah handed us brown-stained papers with the supposed ritual and had us stand in a circle holding candles to recite the incantations. The atmosphere grew tense, our focus so intense that the lines between reality and fantasy began to blur. When the final words of the ritual were spoken, a chill ran through the room. The candles flickered, and an eerie silence settled over us. We exchanged nervous glances, but Sarah's wide-eyed excitement reassured us. We continued the session, battling imaginary foes and saving the kingdom. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was restless, replaying the events of the game. When I finally drifted off, I was plagued by vivid nightmares. Shadows danced around me, whispering in an ancient, guttural language. I awoke drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. The following week, our group met again for another session. We were still riding the excitement from our previous gathering, but the energy in the room was noticeably different. The next day, I discovered I wasn't alone. Sarah called, her voice trembling. "Mike, did you have any strange dreams lately?" she asked. "Yeah," I admitted. "Really vivid nightmares." "Why?" "I did too," she said. "And so did Mark and Jenny." We brushed it off as a coincidence, the result of our intense immersion in the game. But the nightmares persisted, each one more horrifying than the last. We began to see shadows out of the corners of our eyes, hear whispers in the dead of night. Insomnia set in, and our tempers grew short. 2 other players, Ty and Hayden, had a heated argument over something trivial, and Lisa, usually the most cheerful of us, became paranoid and withdrawn. A week later, we gathered for another session. The mood was tense, the joy of our previous games replaced by an undercurrent of fear. Sarah's usually confident demeanor was replaced by a haunted look. We tried to carry on, but it was clear that something was very wrong. During a break, Sarah pulled me aside. "Mike, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The ritual, I didn't just make it up." I stared at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "I found it online," she admitted, her eyes darting around nervously. "It was supposed to be an ancient spell for something, but I didn't know what. I thought it would add authenticity to the campaign, make it more immersive." My blood ran cold. "You used a real spell without knowing what it was for?" She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't think it would actually work. I thought it was just some creepy folklore. I don't even believe in any of that stuff. I didn't think any of us do." I urged her to show me where she got it from. As we dug deeper, we found out it was the opposite of what we did in the game. It was a kind of invitation or release incantation for something dark. We called an emergency meeting, explaining everything to the rest of the group. The revelation hit us like a sledgehammer. Our nightmares, the shadows, the whispers, they were all real. Over the next few weeks, our lives unraveled. The supposed entity we had summoned fed off our fear, growing stronger with each passing day. The nightmares intensified, leaving us exhausted and on edge. Violent outbursts became more frequent, and the bonds of our friendship began to fray. Mark, who had always been the voice of reason, became increasingly aggressive. He snapped at the slightest provocation, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. One night, he punched a hole in the wall during an argument with Lisa. Lisa, once the heart of our group, was consumed by paranoia. She thought we were all trying to mess with her. She started seeing things that weren't there, claiming that the shadows were watching her. She covered her mirrors, convinced that the entity was using them as portals. Jenny's cheerful demeanor vanished, replaced by a profound sadness. She withdrew from us, her laughter a distant memory. She stopped coming to our sessions, isolating herself from the group. Sarah was haunted by guilt, feeling responsible for bringing this nightmare into our lives. And then there was me. My mind became a constant haze, unable to concentrate. My nights were sleepless, and my days were filled with dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the entity was lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike. Desperate for a solution, we delved into research. We scoured ancient texts and obscure websites, searching for any clue that could help us banish the entity. We even considered finding an exorcist. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that we found a glimmer of hope. Sarah discovered a digitized old tome online from about the same period as the ritual she found. The book detailed various rituals and their counter-rituals. It was in this tome that we found a purification ritual that could cleanse the darkness we had unleashed. The ritual required us to perform a series of steps in the same space as the original incantation, using specific herbs and symbols. We would need to face the entity together, confronting our deepest fears. It was a daunting task, and none of us believed in the paranormal, but it was our only hope. We gathered the necessary materials and prepared for the ritual. The full moon was only a week away, and the tension among us was palpable. We were exhausted, our nerves frayed, but we knew we had to see this through. The night of the full moon arrived, and we gathered in the basement, the site of the original summoning. The air was thick with anticipation, the flickering candlelight casting eerie shadows on the walls. We arranged the herbs and symbols according to the instructions, each step bringing us closer to the confrontation. Sarah began the incantation, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. We joined in, our voices blending into a harmonious chant. The air grew colder, the shadows deepening as we chanted the invocation to cleanse the lingering darkness. As the ritual progressed, the temperature dropped further. Our breath came out in visible puffs, and the candles flickered wildly. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the room, sending a shiver down my spine. While I wanted to dismiss it with some logical explanation, I struggled to do so. The shadows seemed to move in unnatural ways, extending themselves into the areas lit by candles. It was as if the shadows themselves were trying to extinguish them, but I was sleep-deprived. I told myself I had to be seeing things. We continued the incantation, the power of our words, pushing back against the darkness. We heard a snarl. We all looked at each other as we continued our chanting. My vision began to get darker, and I began to feel light-headed. I felt a surge of fear, my resolve wavering. But then I looked at my friends, their faces etched with determination. We had come this far together, and we would see it through together. The final words of the incantation echoed through the room, and my vision became clearer. The shadows seemed to normalize, moving softly, dancing with the candlelight. The air grew warmer. The oppressive weight seemed to visibly lift from each of us. We collapsed to the floor, exhausted. The basement was filled with a profound silence. The quiet of the room felt deafening. Whatever we had said, whatever we had done, seemed to work. We had faced the darkness and seemingly emerged victorious. But the experience had left its mark. We were changed, each of us bearing the scars of our ordeal. Mark's aggression had lessened, but he still carried a simmering anger. Lisa's paranoia had diminished, but she remained wary of the shadows. Jenny's sadness had lifted, but she was quieter, more introspective. As for me, I carried a sense of weariness and trepidation about anything fantasy-related that would never fully fade. I didn't bring that ritual into our game, but the consequences were devastating. I felt responsible in some way, but I didn't know why. Life slowly returned to normal, but the memory of the summoning lingered. Our group continued to meet for a little while, but eventually disbanded. We occasionally talked about starting a new campaign, even using a different system, but it never took hold. We eventually drifted apart. The only things we knew of each other's lives, we gleaned through our shared Facebook posts and Instagram. We never spoke of the ritual again, but it remained a silent presence, a reminder of the darkness we had faced. The basement, once a place of joy and laughter, held a different kind of energy now. It became storage, a place for things to be buried, like the memories of the ritual and its aftermath I wish I could rid myself of. The shadows in the corners no longer held the same dread, but they were a reminder of the entity we had summoned and banished. They whispered of the unknown, of the thin line between reality and the supernatural. And though we had succeeded in banishing the entity, there was always a lingering question. Had we truly rid ourselves of its influence? Or had a part of it remained within us, forever linked to the darkness we had summoned?
This D&D game got a little too real for these players. Have you ever been in a game that seemed to bleed through to reality? Let me know in the comments. Hit that like button to show your appreciation. It really helps me out. Simon says, subscribe for more haunting content.